All right, so ever find yourself like scrolling through LinkedIn and you're like, how do people build these incredible careers in tech?
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're doing today. We are taking a deep dive into the career of Lakin Mohapatra.
Okay.
He's a tech lead at Mindfire Solutions.
Oh.
And we've got his LinkedIn profile, we've got his resume.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to kind of try to figure out what makes him tick.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting looking at Lakin's profile, I mean, it's not just like a list of technical skills.
Right.
Which, don't get me wrong, he clearly knows how to, work with code.
Yeah.
He's been at Mindfire Solutions for over a decade.
Wow.
Started as a software engineer, and now he's leading teams as a team lead.
Right.
But his profile, it kind of hints at this broader understanding, I think, of what it really takes to be successful in tech.
Yeah, it's true. You don't climb the ranks like that just by,
Yeah.
being good at coding.
Right.
Like, what were the things that happened? What were the choices, the projects that helped him to go from software engineer to senior software engineer to associate lead and then finally to team lead?
I think it's always a mix, right? So obviously you have to demonstrate you have this exceptional technical ability.
Right.
But I think you also need to take initiative and you have to show leadership potential even when you're an individual contributor and really develop that knack for problem solving that goes beyond just, fixing a bug.
And speaking of problem solving,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I noticed in Lakin's LinkedIn contributions is that he seems to be really good at taking complex technical jargon and turning it into something that anyone can understand.
Yeah.
Especially when he's talking with clients.
That's a skill that I think is often overlooked, but it's so essential, especially as you move into those leadership positions.
Sorry.
Being able to bridge that gap between your technical teams and your stakeholders, it's crucial for building that trust.
For sure.
Making sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, and then this is what really got me. Lakin's commitment to continuous learning.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this guy, his LinkedIn learning history is extensive. He's taken everything from Golang, AI and ML to like some really niche stuff. Like I saw he even took one on Rhapsody by IBM.
Oh, wow.
It's like he knows what the next big thing in tech is going to be before it even happens.
I think it's that adaptability
Yeah.
and that real drive to constantly expand his skill set.
Right.
That really makes Lane stand out. And it makes sense, right? Tech is constantly evolving.
For sure.
If you rest on what you already know, you're going to get left behind.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, looking at all these different courses he's taken, like what sparked his interest in such a diverse range of technologies? Was he just trying to stay ahead of the curve? Or was it pure intellectual curiosity? Or maybe it was both.
It's a great question. I think as we learn a little more about the projects that he worked on, we'll get a better sense of that. But I think it speaks to a certain mindset, one that embraces challenges and sees learning not as, something I have to do, but as an opportunity for growth.
We were just talking about Lakin's commitment to, always be learning,
right,
which is amazing. All those courses, so impressive.
Yeah.
But then you see how he takes all that knowledge and makes it something that anyone can understand. And that really struck me, especially when you look at how he talks about communicating complex ideas to clients.
Right.
Like that in itself is a skill.
It's one thing to be, great at writing code. It's a totally other thing to then be able to articulate all those little nuances, all the details to someone who maybe isn't as technical.
Right.
And I think that's really where Lakin shines, Looking at his LinkedIn, you see he's really good at using analogies.
Yeah.
Using really clear language to bridge that gap in communication.
Yeah, and he does it so well. Do you see the one where he compares software architecture to like a kitchen?
Yeah.
The data is like the ingredients, and processing that data is like cooking. And then the user interface is basically how you're presenting, the meal to the diner.
Yeah.
And it's like suddenly something that's like this abstract concept, like software architecture, you can kind of wrap your head around it.
Totally. When you can nail a good analogy, it can work wonders, right?
It's true.
Because you're taking something that's super complex and making it understandable.
Yeah.
Like finding these common threads, right? That can connect these totally different worlds, like in that case, the world of code. And then, everyone's familiar with like being in a kitchen.
Right.
And that skill, being able to connect with your audience like that, meet them where they're at, that's huge, especially when you're trying to, get everyone on board with the project.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So speaking of projects, let's talk about Lakin's real-world experience.
Okay.
Yeah. Because, you look at his resume, it's like, this guy's done it all.
He's got a lot of variety, yeah.
He's worked in retail, healthcare, finance. He's tackled all kinds of projects across different industries. And clearly he can adapt his skills to different challenges, which is huge.
And that's key, right? Because the tech world is constantly changing. You have to be adaptable.
So true.
One of the projects that stood out to me was when he worked on architecting a micro front end, and it was a microservice-based application, and he got to build this from scratch.
Okay, now see, that sounds super impressive.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie, I'm not totally sure what that means.
Yeah.
Can you break that down? Like, what does it even mean to build an application using those things?
Okay, so imagine you're building this really big, complex web application. Like, think of something like Amazon.com.
Okay, yeah.
And instead of just creating this one massive code base, you break it down into all these smaller services. And each of those handles one specific function, and that's the microservices part.
Okay.
It's like, instead of having just, one head chef trying to do every single thing, you have like all these different chefs that have their own specialties, and they can kind of all work together in the kitchen.
So like, instead of one person trying to juggle everything, you have this whole team of experts.
Exactly.
Each one focusing on like what they're really good at.
And what that does is it makes the application way more modular, and it's more flexible. It's easier to maintain.
Makes sense.
Now, on the front end, so that's like the part that the user actually sees and interacts with.
Right.
You have the micro front ends.
Okay.
And it's basically the same idea, where you're breaking down that user interface into these independent components. And you can develop them and deploy them separately.
So it's almost like instead of having just this giant web page that's kind of a pain to update,
Right.
you have all these little pieces.
Right.
And they fit together.
Exactly. So you're creating this seamless experience for the user.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're making it so much easier for the developers.
That's really smart.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to how much Lakin knows.
Right.
Because he was able to not just understand these concepts, but he put them into practice.
Yeah.
He built this whole system from nothing.
That's seriously impressive.
Yeah.
And I mean, it really shows his ability to, he's not just keeping up with technology, he's like way ahead.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just about building these really complex systems for Lake Hansen, right?
Right.
He also led Mindfire Solutions' open source initiative, and that's something I wanted to ask you about. Tell me a little bit about that part of his career and what you think it says about his leadership.
So Lakin leading that whole open source initiative, that really got me thinking.
Yeah.
It's one thing to be really good at, building your own projects.
Right.
But when you can lead a collaborative effort like that, it says something about, like, your leadership.
I think so, too. And, open source software, it's really all about, like, transparency and getting the community involved. So you're basically making all this code available for anyone to use.
To modify, to share. It's kind of like, imagine this giant recipe book.
Okay.
And everyone's, like, putting their best dishes in there.
That's cool.
Yeah. And they just keep refining those recipes.
I like
They
that.
keep getting better and better because everyone's working together.
So it's like less about competition,
Right.
more about growing together.
Exactly. It's about innovation.
Yeah.
And I think for someone like Lankin, who's clearly really into learning,
Right.
and, he likes to push the boundaries,
Yeah.
it makes sense that he'd be drawn to something like this.
Totally.
Leading an open source initiative, it shows that he's willing to share what he knows and to learn from other people.
Right.
To be a part of something that's bigger than himself.
Yeah. And that commitment to giving back, it's not just about code with him, right?
Yeah.
Like you see, he volunteers with Omid A New Hope for Tomorrow.
Right.
And he's been on their governing body for quite a while now. And it's like, okay, this is someone who, he's not just good at tech.
Right.
But he also cares.
He wants to use those skills to help.
Exactly.
And, we don't always see that on a resume.
No, we don't.
Or a LinkedIn profile.
No.
But it's important to remember that, behind all this code, behind these complex projects,
just people.
There are actual people with their own, values, their own passions.
Yeah, and for Lakin, it seems like making a difference is important.
Definitely.
It's really inspiring to see, someone who's dedicated to growing their career, but they also want to give back. And you know what else I thought was kind of cool?
What's that?
He hasn't forgotten about, like, having fun.
Yeah, you need that.
He had this post on LinkedIn, 2 years with my beast. It was his computer setup. I was like, even tech geniuses geek out sometimes.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Everyone needs those outside passions.
For sure.
It's about balance, right?
Yeah.
You can have your career goals and still enjoy life. It's so true. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Lakin Mohapatra's career, what's the